thank you all for this opportunity to talk a little bit about how the Nature Conservancy is using remote sensing. So at the Nature Conservancy, we're looking at a remote sensing data set called the Operational Tillage Information Systems that I manage as our science lead for the soil health and nutrient strategy. And we're using remote sensing because it presents a very cost-effective, consistent, and scalable measurement of soil health practices like cover crops and conservation tillage and so on. My colleague Pipa, as Isaac mentioned, took on another role, so I manage this data set, so I apologize for the last-minute change. So we're working with our partners, the Conservation Tillage Information Center and Applied GeoSolutions, who actually are developing the OpTIS data set to measure adoption on the ground. But I want to set a little bit of context on why the Nature Conservancy is in this space. So as some of you may be aware, we started as a land conservancy back in 1950, and that's still reflected in our core mission, which is to protect the land and water on which all life depends. And that's still a core competency of ours. But of course, we've expanded to over 70 countries, and we work on global challenges. So we're working on global challenges related to food, water, and climate. So as an organization, we now have 4 global priorities. One is to provide food and water sustainably, tackling climate change, protecting our land, and building healthy cities. The North America Agriculture Program, for whom I work, in North America, we're looking at securing fresh water, protecting habitat, and restoring degraded lands. So, as you're probably aware, global population went from 3 billion to 6 billion in 50 years, and crop productivity had to go up about 167%, and we had better pesticide management, we had fertilizers, irrigation, everything contributing to this increase in crop productivity, and kept our cropland expansion to less than 27%, I think. But what it did lead to was a lot of unintended consequences and degraded habitats. And the Gulf of Mexico hypoxia is a big example of this. So we think investing in soil health can help us restore some of the degraded lands, because soil has a number of ecosystem benefits. By investing in soil health, we can create resilient soil systems that ensure productivity and ensure that there is sustainable food production for a growing population. We can ensure that there is a supply of fresh water by limiting sediment and nutrient runoff. And of course, we can decrease the threat of climate change going forward, because cropland soils sequester a lot of carbon, something that we'll see a little later in my presentation today. So at the Conservancy, we're using science to define challenges. We look for a number of partners to work with to deploy solutions from the local to the watershed scale, but we also engage with the industry supply chains to deliver impact at a scale. So this is where, for us, remote sensing comes in, because our goal, we have a huge goal. We want to achieve widespread adoption of adaptive soil health and nutrient management practices on over 50% of U.S. cropland by 2025. And this is an aspirational goal. We'll need the help and support of all our partners to do this. But when we had this goal, we also realized that we needed a way to measure what's going on the ground right now. So what are the baseline? What's the baseline look like? What are the trends going forward? Where is conservation occurring, and why is it occurring in those spots? So we needed a way to do that. So if we do get to our goals, the size of the prize is enormous, and this is what we're working towards, and this is why monitoring becomes so critical to our mission. We're looking at reducing greenhouse gases by over 25 million metric tons. We're looking at limiting nutrient runoff by over 300 million pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus, reducing sediment erosion by 116 million metric tons, and of course, increasing or conserving available water capacity in our cropland soils by 3.6 million acre feet. So these are huge goals for us. as I mentioned, one of the things that we're trying to do is engage industry to drive scale. And again, this is where large-scale monitoring comes into the picture. So industry supply chains by themselves are getting very interested in the soil health and nutrient space, both to meet their own sustainability commitments. You might have heard of GM's, General Mills' goals to source their top 10 ingredients. They want to get to 100% sustainable sourcing of their top 10 ingredients. So, and they've already met or exceeded their goal already. So a lot of these companies are very interested in sustainability, either for their own goals or because they understand that there's a concern of like a viable, sustainable supply of food and water in the future. So we engage with several industries driven by the principles that we ensure a conservation benefit, but also so that we can drive change through, we can drive impact at scale through corporate policies and their products. I want to give you two examples of how we're trying to work and how it connects to the OpTIS data set that I want to talk about. So the one on the left is is a group of companies and conservation groups working together to meet consumer demand for more sustainable food. It's something called Midwest Row Crop Collaborative. How they work is they have 3 priority watersheds in the Midwest, and they're deploying solutions in those watersheds. And the idea is they take the lessons learned in those watersheds and they want to apply it across the continent. The newer venture is a group of foundations and companies that have come together to form the Ecosystem Services Market Consortium, and this is they want to award farmers for the benefits that they provide to basically advance ecosystem markets and incentivize farmers who improve their production practices by implementing soil health practices that then have a number of ecosystem benefits, such as better water quality, carbon sequestration, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. Core of what we're trying to do. So remote sensing creates a consistent and a systematic way of monitoring large trends across large areas. And this is something that industries and governments are very interested in, as I just mentioned before. And it also reduces the burden on farmers to report their practices. So it's an easy way for us to figure out what the impacts are of putting soil health practices on the ground. We're working with the Nature Conservancy, Conservation Tillage Information Center, and Applied GeoSolutions are actually working on two technologies. OpTIS is the technology, and DNDC is a biogeochemical model. So OpTIS is basically a geospatial tool that takes publicly available remote sensing data from Landsat and Sentinel satellites, and then it is able to, through a proprietary program, able to give us adoption trends for conservation tillage, no tillage, and cover crops. So where our partners come in is, this is essentially a continuation of CTIC's long-standing Transect surveys for tillage practices. So this is their interest in working with us. The DNDC model is the denitrification decomposition model, and this is something that entities like the Ecosystem Services Market Consortium is very interested in, because it can take the results from a tool like OpTIS, and it can use it as an input in this biogeochemical tool and give us the outcomes from adoption. The other thing that I want to mention about OpTIS is that although the analysis is conducted on a farm field scale, because using all publicly available data, all this data is not, the private data is not available to us. All of this is aggregated up to scales like state, HUC8, and crop reporting district levels, and it basically provides, protects farmer privacy while giving us snapshots over time and space of what's going on the ground. So where is this data available? The data is currently available in land resource area region M, or what's commonly known as the Corn Belt. It's available publicly, free of cost, on the CTIC website that I will share with you soon. Satellite images are basically collected every 16 days from Terra, Sentinel to 2A and B, and Landsat. And the images are stitched together, and they're analyzed using a sophisticated proprietary algorithm. And what AGS has is a tool to remove reflectance and other things, and they're using commonly used remote sensing indices like the normalized difference vegetation index and normalized difference tillage index to make an estimate of the amount of residue that's available before planting, and if the presence or absence of a winter cover crop, and they're also able to tell if there's crop rotation. The data are aggregated, as I mentioned, and it can't be linked to an individual. Once they had this algorithm, there's also constant on the ground truthing that's going on. For this first set of data, they looked at over 900 fields. So they had agronomists go to different fields, take pictures, and they compared the predictions from the OpTIS tool to what's going on on the ground. Right now, they're at an accuracy of about 89% over the Corn Belt, but in places like Iowa and Minnesota, the accuracy is up to 95%. So we think it's a great promising technology tool that's available for everyone to use. So what do we have now? So we have conservation, tillage, cover crop acreage, residue, the amount of residue left on the fields. For example, it basically silos the amount of residue on the field, say 15 to 30%, 30 to 50%, over 50%, and also it can also tell us if there is no-till or no-till practices on the ground, if there is a winter commodity crop or a cover crop on the ground, and so on. So we have all this data across the Corn Belt for the years between 2005 and 2018. So we have 14 years of data. And we also have the DNDC model results, which basically tells us about soil organic carbon, nitrous oxide emissions, available water capacity, and nitrate leaching for the years between 2005 and 2017. So the OpTIS data, again, like I mentioned, is available at the state, Huggate, and crop reporting district scales. It's available on the CTIC website. There's also a report on the CTIC website that dives deeper into the methodology and the accuracy and the actual results from the current version of data that's available right now. So this is what the website looks like. If you go to the CTIC website, you can pick if you want to see tillage, residue, winter cover, soil health, or total soil health practices. You can choose the year, the units you want your information in, and the spatial scale at which you want it in. And the crop types are corn, soybeans, small grains, and other crops. I also want to say that the CTIC and TNC are now working on a visualization tool that will probably go online sometime in the mid of next year. That's going to make it easier to visualize all the data and also provide a better way to download the data from this website. I don't think I can actually go on the internet and show you, but if you click on it, what you get is the data in tabular form, and of course you can copy it onto an Excel sheet, but it's not as convenient as just downloading some of the data. This is what we found with the OpTIS tool over the years. We see that conservation tillage, the trends are encouraging. Conservation tillage has remained between 40 to 50%. It's extremely stable across the Midwest. And the trends are also encouraging when you think of cover crops. The cover crops have gone from 1.6% across the Corn Belt to over 3%. That doesn't seem like a lot, but that's encouraging because a lot of these, increases in acreage have come in the last few years. So a number of efforts in outreach, work of a number of partners and others have resulted in a bump in cover crop acreage. This is a map representation. Again, if you look at, this is a the data represented for each Huck-8 watershed across the Corn Belt. Although it looks like there are some percentage point differences in a lot of Huck-8s, overall between 2005 and 2018, the actual acreage of cover crops has gone up by 6 million acres. So that's an encouraging trend again. No-till has remained fairly consistent between 19 and 20% of the overall 40 to 50% of conservation tillage. All encouraging results for us. The other thing is there's also, especially recently, this fairly encouraging trend of cover crop acreage going up. You see a lot more blues here in a lot of watersheds where in recent years there's a bump in the number of cover crop acres on the ground. So we went from less than 2 million cover crop acres back in 2005 to over 4 million cover crop acres in 2018. That's of course a long way to go, but that's where it's at. So not only can you look at the spatial differences across the Corn Belt, you can go to your individual states or regions and look at how the acreage has changed over the years. And some of the results are, of course, intuitive. You see conservation tillage has remained consistent for both after corn and after soy. But after soy, it's lower, as you'd expect, because we know that it's a little more difficult to do conservation tillage right before corn planting. So this data is telling us that. Cover crops after corn and after soy also have a similar trend. And there's the thing that I was just talking about. Although I don't have the 2016 data here, cover crops really takes off in 2016, 2018. So OpTIS gives us this really powerful way to measure annual trends. And it also gives us a way to compare hotspots and cold spots of conservation. In fact, TNC is now working on an analysis trying to tease out all the social, economic, institutional, biophysical factors that drive adoption, and we're trying to see why do some places adopt more than others. So that this data set allows us to do that on a large scale. The other results that I wanted to share with you today are the denitrification decomposition model results. This is especially of interest to the industry, like I mentioned. And this is important because we want to show benefit that the farmers are providing in terms of water quality, carbon sequestration, and improving soil health practices on their ground. AGS did was they not only had a scenario where they took what's happening on the ground, we'll call that the OpTIS map scenario, so the actual cover crop and conservation tillage adoption on the ground. They simulated that in the DNDC model, but they also had a number of counterfactuals. So they had a scenario where what if there was no conservation tillage or cover crops on the ground? What if there was no conservation tillage, and what if there was no cover crops? And that kind of tells us the relative importance of all these practices and how accumulative the benefits are. So what you see here on the left is the area-weighted soil organic carbon stock change between 2005 to 2017, which we saw with the OpTIS mapped scenario. So some things about this. So what we find from this is agricultural cropland soils across the Corn Belt are sequestering nearly 6.5 million metric tons of carbon every year. When you compare that to the scenario where there is no soil health practices on the ground, they're actually sequestering more than 300,000 metric tons more than they would have if there were no conservation practices on the ground. The other important thing that I want to point out is all these watersheds, 97% of them are sequestering some form of carbon with the conservation practices we have on the ground right now. But if you were to take those conservation practices away, if people stop doing conservation tillage or cover crop for some reason, only 38% of those soils would be sequestering carbon. So that kind of points to how important agriculture is in mitigating the impacts of climate change and also improving soil health. Similarly, although nutrient management is more of a factor when it comes to nitrous oxide emissions, if you compare the nitrous oxide emissions in 2005 to 2017, because the number of cover crops have gone up in particular, what you find is the nitrous oxide emissions have gone down from 2.2 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare to about 1.6 kilogram of nitrogen per hectare. And the results for nitrous oxide emission reductions with conservation practices and comparing them to a scenario where there were no conservation practices is similar to that of soil organic carbon. We've been working with our partners to continue to fundraise for additional geographies and continued monitoring across the Corn Belt, and we're ensuring that this data is available publicly at those scales for everyone. And they're posted on the OpTIS website, and this includes the new visualization tool that will come online in the middle of next year. We also have in the pipeline several research projects using the OpTIS data, and I mentioned one of them, which was the soil health practices trends analysis, which is trying to tease out all the different factors that are leading to adoption in different parts of the Corn Belt. That's it, and I'm happy to take any questions. It's the Corn Belt for now, but we're expanding the geography.
Are they doing on-the-ground comparison to compare to make sure it's accurate data?
Yeah, so far they've, so in the first release they did about 900 field checks in Indiana, and they have they have a confusion matrix that kind of tells you the false positives and false negatives. The overall accuracy is about 87%. And out of the 200 fields that turned out to be cover crops, about 132, that OpTIS classified as cover crops, about 135 of them actually did have cover crops. So the accuracy is pretty high. But because this is a machine learning algorithm, it needs to be trained further with on-the-ground checks. So they've kind of started expanding to other states. So they're doing ground truthing in Iowa and Minnesota and so on.
So some of the criteria that was used based on these are watershed based, correct?
How they pick the ground truthings?
Well, actually, how did they pick it when you were checking these areas, specific areas?
Yeah.
What was the major criteria for some of the first ones that you picked?
Some of it was random, and also Indiana has transect surveys on cover crops, so they were able to have the state data set on where cover crops were, and they also had agronomists who went out and actually checked and took pictures on the ground to see if there were cover crops or not. So they basically compared the survey data to where the agronomist said there was cover crops versus what the OpTIS tool was telling them was a cover crop field. So the analysis is all done on a farm and field scale, but it's all done within the program and then aggregated up. So it's able to compare field scale data. It's able to match field to field because it's all geolocated.
So the thought is to expand this and go, what are the next areas you plan on looking at?
We're looking at Tennessee. We're looking at parts of Minnesota that weren't covered in that first Corn Belt area. We're looking at parts of Ohio that weren't covered. in that first thing. But more than that, even for the Corn Belt itself, we're fundraising for continuous monitoring so we can continue to tell what's going on the ground.
Do we have other questions? Yes,
Yeah.
over here.
You must have a hypothesis about why cover cropping really took off in 2016. Give us your best.
Some of what we're seeing, for example, I'm going to be a little honest and a little partial to what's going on in Iowa on the ground. We've had 2 or 3 priority watersheds where there's been, with partners like TFI and Safe Industries, and we're doing a lot of outreach with a number of different partners. And there are also a number of demonstration sites in the area that are showing the benefits of cover crops. It could be any of those social reasons, but could also be just more awareness, more cost share available. So there are a number of theories there, and that's what we're trying to get. The data is pretty noisy, as all social science research is.
Questions?